Thanks for listening to the Drummers Weekly Groovecast. You can contact the show at twitter.com/DW Groovecast and through Facebook at facebook.com/Drummers Weekly Groovecast.
Good evening.
I am warning you right now, if you touch my drums, I will stab you in the neck with a knife.
Ain't a bookie. Ain't a bookie.
Mom! Take it easy. Lower it.
I'm not gonna lower it. I have to do this now.
I don't mind you playing it, but lower it.
Everything get straightened out?
No, we had a problem. I mean, we tried to do everything we could.
What do you mean?
Well, you know what I mean.
Next.
Little trouble there. You're rushing.
Yeah, well, you know, that's just like your opinion, man.
Yeah.
We're back and ready for Interview Monday. How's everyone doing? Phil here from the Drummers Weekly Groovecast. Once again, it's my pleasure, my treat. For those of you who know me, you know that my guest today is one of my longtime favorites. Kalam Bob Moses has been a favorite of mine for over 30 years. I was very fortunate as a kid to have a teacher who hipped me to Bob through some of his recordings with Gary Burton, Steve Swallow, Steve Kuhn, and probably most impressive on me was his recording with Pat Metheny's first solo album, Bright Size Life, featuring a young whippersnapper, Jaco Pastorius. I also got to know Bob rather well through his book that he published through Modern Drummer Publications called Drum Wisdom. You guys who've heard my episode on drum method books realize that that's one of the, what I consider to be one of the top Bibles of drumming. It's an absolute must. And we take a good bit of time going through that book and talking about that book, about its origins, about Bob writing it, and about the status of it right now. So, give you just a little bit of background. I called Bob a couple of weeks ago. We talked a little bit. He's such a great, humble, wonderful spirit that he basically said, man, I don't even know if I've got anything to offer for you and your listeners. And if you just take a moment to look at the different people that he has performed with, he was in the first ever jazz rock group, the Free Spirits, with Larry Coryell, which essentially led him to playing with Gary Burton, which led him to playing with Steve Swallow, to Pat Metheny, to Steve Kuhn, and so on and so on and so on. His back catalog and discography is absolutely incredible. He started teaching at the New England Conservatory in the 80s. He's still there right now, still continues to do that. And by his own admission, he doesn't gig that much anymore. He just doesn't. He plays whenever he wants to play. And as he says in the interview, he says that he has retired 40 years ago. So I'm going to let Bob do the rest of the talking, but I do also want to throw out a major special thanks to my buddy Ryan Almario over at Flip Funk Studios for some help on the production end of things. When Bob and I got on line to record, there was a tremendous amount of ground hum coming through his channel that we just couldn't figure out. And I wasn't going to stop recording. I wanted to let the organic nature of the interview continue on and just kind of let the chips fall where they may. And quite honestly, when I went back and listened to it, it was unlistenable. But I could hear Bob in the background. It's just the ground hum was as loud as he was. So I asked for a little bit of help with Ryan, and he did a tremendous job. So be a little bit patient with us regarding the audio fidelity of this show. It's not quite up to our standards, but the content is above and beyond. So as we go ahead and move into our talk with Kalam Bob Moses, we're going to use a little bit of joiner music from Bob. It's from one of, if not the first record recorded at his native Pulse Studios, and it's a percussion record. It's with Bob and the wonderful percussionist Tupac Mantilla Gomez, and this is a track called Cuerpos Bajos. All right, Bob Moses, welcome to the Drummers Weekly Groovecast, man. It's an honor to have you on the show. How are you doing today?
Oh, I'm fine. Thank you. Thank you for inviting me. Thank you for your interest. I appreciate it.
Oh, man, Bob, it's our pleasure. Let me tell you, we don't do that many interviews on the show. We have a very kind of a short select list, and you've been a guest that's been on that short list, so we appreciate your willingness to be on. And one thing I want to throw out before I start asking you some questions is I just want to tell all of our listeners that may not be familiar with Bob that Bob has got a vast and deep catalog. He's been active on the scene for over 50 years. And so one of the things that when Bob and I talked earlier last week, we decided that, of course, we were going to talk a little bit about the past, but we were not going to dwell on it. We're going to dwell a lot on the future, talk a lot about the future and the present. But for those of you who want even a little bit more detail on Bob's past, Bob has done plenty of interviews in Modern Drummer. There's interviews online. And so feel free to do a little bit of what I like to say, drumming archaeology. Get in there and dig in a little bit and learn something about Bob, especially if he piques your interest on some of the things that we talk about today. And so, Bob, the first thing I wanted to talk about is something that you mentioned when we were chatting last week, is that you're a New Yorker. You now live in the Boston area. But when you grew up, one of the hippest things, man, I've ever heard is that in the same building where you lived also lived Max Roach, Art Blakey, Elvin Jones, Roland Kirk, Abby Lincoln, and just tell us a little bit about what the vibe was like, man, growing up in that area.
Oh, I loved it. It was a great building. You never knew who you would run into in the elevator. You'd see Jimmy Garrison or Eric Dolphy or Booker Little. Or, you never knew. Just people coming up and down the elevator. That building was on Central Park West, 101st Street, Central Park West, and so from one side of it, you overlook the park. And I remember seeing Eric Dolphy, and I could just hear him, but flute. He would play the flute. He would sit on a rock and play the flute with the birds. He liked to get the birds going. He had an ear that he could hear the intervals of the birds, and he would play that on the flute, and he kind of duetting or jamming with the birds. And I loved it. And of course, there's a lot of traffic going on, so it would just be floating over through the air, but I could see him. And that was a beautiful thing. And that neighborhood had a lot of great musicians in it. My uncle had a cleaning store that was down. He didn't own it, but he worked there. He was a jazz fan, my Uncle Norman. And Duke Ellington used to come in there. Horace Silver, who a great pianist, one of my favorite groups at the time. When I was that age, I loved Horace's band. He had kind of a sweating disorder. First, he played really hard. He really worked really hard, and he had a tendency to sweat a lot. So he would go through 3 suits a night. In those days, gigs were often 6 nights a week. You booked for a week. It doesn't happen much anymore, but that was usually what was happening then. And so that's like 18 suits. That's a big dry cleaning bill, right? Yeah, it's expensive, the dry cleaning. And anyway, my uncle would tell Horace, he said, if the owner isn't here, watch when the owner isn't here, and he would do his suits for free when the owner wasn't looking, because he loved jazz. So, I'd see people all the time great musicians in that neighborhood, and it was nice being close to the park as well.
Well, that's it, man. How old were you when this was happening? What were were you like high school age, middle school age?
I was, I guess, what do you call it, junior high, like from seventh to 7th grade, something like that. Yeah, junior high. So, I don't know, 14 or 15 or something. Mingus used to come over, too. He didn't live in the building. He lived across the park. He lived on the 5th Avenue, which is on the other side of the park, even more upscale. And but he was a friend of my family, so he would come over. He played duets with me when I was 13, 14. He would play piano. I played drums. He wouldn't go easy on me either, which was but he was sweet to me. But he was tough with music. And in fact, I was there for the audition. My dad drove Rasan, who was just rolling at the time.
Right.
He had just come to New York from Columbus, Ohio, not too long ago, and he was auditioning for Mingus's band. And since he was blind, he couldn't drive, although he wanted to. he was always trying to get somebody to let him drive, and thankfully nobody did. But although he might have surprised us, his hearing was so, maybe he would have. But anyway, we drove him over there, and that was a beautiful meeting. A meeting of titans, really, of Mingus and Rasan, and of course he got the gig. So I got to witness things like that.
So, were you playing? Were you playing drums at that time?
Yeah. I started playing drums about age 10, but basically, I would play whatever instrument I had.
Yeah.
So I had a piano, so I played piano. I had vibes. I played vibes. When I went to a summer camp, there was kind of a music camp, I think, and they gave me a trumpet. I played trumpet. One summer they gave me a bass, and I played bass. And if I didn't own the bass, I would have kept it going. But for that time, so yeah, I played. I'm still like that. If whatever instrument comes into my hands, I'll try to get something, even if it's primitive. But I figure my drumming is primitive anyway. But that's the first thing that I played was drums. And the first drum was given to me by my godfather, it was Ed Shaughnessy.
Wow,
great drummer.
Yeah, quite a childhood you had there with the musical masters at your fingertips. I mean, I don't know how much interaction did you have with those folks at that time? Did you ever take any lessons from Art or Max or Elvin?
No. That wasn't. That never even occurred to me to do. That's not how we learn, by lessons. We learn by listening.
Yeah.
And playing, but they let me play. Max, I had a lot of conversations with. Blakey, not so much. I just see him in the building. Elvin was always sweet to me, but a few words and a smile. Of course, I heard him play a lot.
Right.
Many times, hundreds of times. Because he was my favorite at that time. So, no, we didn't. It wasn't like lessons. That wasn't really it. I've come to realize something that I'm an unschooled musician. I had a couple of teachers early on, but I can't say I really learned that much. I was grateful to them. They were good people, but music is really learning music is really a fairly simple thing, I would say. And of course, if people actually believe what I'm about to say, all the music schools would go out of business, and cats like me would be out of a job. But you just sit at the instrument and keep playing until it sounds good. That's it. And then when you get to that, keep playing until it sounds better.
Yeah, well,
and then keep playing until it sounds better than that. Now, if you can't tell whether it sounds good or not, then you got a problem. You're probably not going to be a musician or a good one.
Man,
simple. It's really simple. Save people a lot of money.
I was going to say, and it's impossible to argue with that, man. That's exactly right. I mean,
this is my truth. Nobody has to agree with it, but it's pretty obvious to me.
Yeah. Well, one person that you mentioned that you did take a few lessons with is a legendary educator that has written several different books, and you actually got to study with Morris Goldenberg for a short period of time.
Yes.
What?
Yeah, and that was kind of a blessing because he wasn't taking high school kids. He had a waiting list of best Juilliard students, classical. He taught out at Juilliard.
Right.
Columbia Music School, famous classical, mostly classical school. And yeah, my one of my other family friends, a great pianist, Stanley Free, knew Morris, so he intervened for me so he would accept me as a student. And you know, he was great at the classical stuff: xylophone, marimba, timpani, snare drum, reading parts, you know, classical parts and stuff. And I did a little bit of that. I enjoyed it. You know, a few times I played in an orchestra. It's a great experience just to hear the sound of orchestra, to be part of it. But I never felt like it was that much for the drums. Sometimes you have to wait 632 bars just to hit a triangle. It's like, and then if you miss it, oh man, you gotta kill yourself. You don't get. There's no chance for redemption. You know. So I didn't think that was really what interested me most, or what I wanted to do with music. But I appreciate it, and I actually quit studying with him. It's a funny story. I mean, it's okay story. I hope everybody understands I have a lot of respect for the man. But in those days, they had something called Gretsch Drum Night at Birdland every year, once a year. And they would have 5 sets of drums set up. And usually the first set or 2 would be Max, Philly Joe, Art Blakey, Elvin, and Mel Lewis. They'd have one token white guy. Mel Lewis would play. He was a great drummer. So, yeah. and then they would play together. They would trade. They would kind of battle in a way. They played with a band. They take turns. After that, they'd have the second string guys who were equally great, but maybe not as famous, would come in. That's when I heard Edgar Bateman, who I consider the greatest drummer I ever heard, and Alvin Queen, and a bunch of great drummers would come in the later sets. You know. But anyway, I would go there every year, once a year. And so I told Morris Goldenberg about it, particularly Elvin. I was so into Elvin. I said, oh, you got to go. You should hear it. You should hear Elvin, you know. So I came for the next lesson, and he's told me, he said, oh, I went to that gig you told me about. I said, really? I didn't see you there. He said, well, I left kind of early. It wasn't really my cup of tea. I said, well, okay. And what'd you think of Elvin? You know? And he goes, something like, I'm paraphrasing, but it's something like, oh, I thought he was disgusting. He was sweating and grunting like a pig. He was playing like an animal or something, you know. And then he goes on to say, but don't get me wrong, I do like jazz. I like the modern jazz quartet, for example.
Yeah.
Which were also great, but they wore tuxedos and they didn't sweat. And I thought, and that struck me, as soon as he said it, something broke for me, and I just realized that he wasn't the teacher for me. I remember I said to him something like, thank you for the generosity of accepting me as a student, but that guy you thought was disgusting, that's kind of what I want to do, and I don't think you can help me to get there. So thank you, bye. And I left it. And the kids in the hall at Juilliard couldn't believe that some young punk was walking out on the great Morris Golden. But that was me. I was kind of a rebel. But he was a great man. But there was a lot. I found that to be a lot of what I would call maybe inadvertent racism in classical. Yeah, I mean, they weren't like hating black people or anything, but they had this kind of superiority thing. I had a teacher one time, music school teacher, who said the first serious jazz composer is George Gershwin. And I remember I called him out. I cursed him out too. I said, you're a racist, MF, whatever, you know, because I was that way. I was saying, what are you talking about? Jelly Roll Morton wasn't serious.
Yeah.
Louis Armstrong, Earl Hines, Scott Joplin. Yeah, it was this attitude. I never liked it. I was always aware of it. This kind of, like I say.
Yeah.
Yeah, kind of a racist, unaware that it was racist, really. But to me, it was very obvious.
So, Bob, let's skip forward just a few years and talk a little bit about one of the first groups that you played with. Let's talk about the Free Spirits with Larry Coryell and Jim Pepper. The first question I want to ask you is, do you feel like that from those early sides that you guys recorded, do you feel like you guys were a direct influence on especially like Jimi Hendrix or The Doors, any of those rock or pop groups. Because every time I ever play any Free Spirits for anybody, if they don't know who it is, they think that it's Mitch Mitchell playing drums.
It's a compliment. He was great. I don't know. We didn't become that famous to be an influence. I'm not sure how many of those people heard us play. We had a little gig at this club called The Scene. We were the house band, so we had an every night gig. I think we made $10 each. Yeah. But life was cheap in those days. We were getting by. We used to go to the gig in a hearse. That was our band. Somebody found a used, broken down hearse. So talk about Grateful Dead. we were riding in a hearse with our instruments to the gig. But people would come in and sit in with us because the club that we played in, the Scene, it was a hang. We played opposite the Velvet Underground for 3 weeks. I thought they were awful. Yeah. But we played opposite them. They were famous. All the Warhols people, talk about some freaks, man. Wow. Would come to the club. But a lot of famous musicians, they would play, a rock musician would play a big gig at Madison Square Garden or some big place, and they would come to the Scene later to hang, to drink, and so sometimes they would sit in. So Hendrix actually sat in with us one time. And of course I loved him. He was a great player and kind of seemed to be a very humble, almost shy person. And I have to say, I think Coryell intimidated him because he didn't play guitar, he played bass. He didn't want to mess with the guitar with Coryell. Coryell was playing stuff very much like Hendrix, but also had that whole Wes Montgomery jazz thing down, playing free stuff before I ever heard Sonny Chirac or any of the free players. Coryell was really extraordinary and also a great singer and songwriter. And the other guitarist, Columbus Baker, was more of a rhythm guitar player, but also a beautiful singer and great lyricist. To this day, he's a great poet and great words. So we had some beautiful songs. When I try to describe the band to people that never heard it, and I know it's a very inadequate description. These kind of comparisons are never accurate, but just to give people a kind of a vague reference, I said it's kind of Free Spirits was kind of like the Beatles, Motown, R&B mixed with Coltrane, Albert Island. Kind of like that.
I think that's pretty accurate, man. And you were definitely a predecessor to a lot of other what we'll just call jazz rock bands. I think there's a lot of the Free Spirits that can be found in these other bands that later on had success, like Chicago and Blood, Sweat, and Tears, and then of course Hendrix as well. So I think you guys might have had a little bit more influence than you were possibly aware of.
I don't know about that. I do think we were the first jazz rock band.
Yeah.
That basically, so what? Somebody had it.
Somebody had to do it, right?
Those bands like Blood, Sweat, and Tears and Chicago, they were much more pop, much more commercial, much more safe, much more arranged, more like studio cats.
Right.
Like studio. Our stuff was raw. It was, like I say, more like Coltrane, Albert Island, and we used to stretch out too. I sent you a bunch of CDs, and I didn't send you everything because I didn't want to overload. I felt like this would be like, too much, way too much, like an albatross if I sent you everything. But there is a recording of the Free Spirits live at the Scene. There was 2 recordings, and the one live at the Scene, which is really closer to how we sounded. There's a tune on there we played 2 sets, and we had a couple of tunes from the second set. The first set, we played our kind of tightest rock set we could because Bill Graham was in the audience, and he was a big promoter. He started the Fillmore West, and I think he helped get Santana going, and he loved jazz and Latin music, but he was a rock promoter, and he did the Fillmore East later. I think he died in a helicopter crash or something.
Yeah.
Strong dude. Anyway, so at that time, we wanted to be famous, so we thought we got to do our rock show for Bill Graham, and we did the first set. Kind of going quick from one tune to another, and blah blah blah, and then he split. So I think the second set we got really stoned. I'm pretty sure, and Dave Liebman sat in, Randy Brecker sat in, Joe Beck sat in, and we did one tune. It was one of our tunes called "I Want to Be Free," but it sounds like Ascension, like that Coltrane record meets rock. It's crazy with Leaps, Jim Pepper, and Randy going off, and Coriel and Joe Beck going off. It's wild, man, and I never heard anything like it, you know. So, but I don't think those other bands would do anything like that. They were much more slick, much more tight, slick.
Absolutely. So, Bob, you were with the Free Spirits for several years, and then one of the next gigs that you've had a long running relationship with was, I think you and Larry both were with Gary Burton for a while. How did that come about?
Well, Gary used to come down and sit in with the Free Spirits. Like I said, we had all kind of people who would come to sit in with the Free Spirits. Some were rockers, like Hendrix. We had Mitch Ryder from the Detroit Wheels and the Devil with the Blue Dress on. He came down. Some of the guys from the Young Rascals, the lead singer, Felix, some Italian cats. They were good, rock band. They would sit in. Had all kind of people, and some jazz people like Randy Brecker and Gary Burton, Joe Beck, people like that. So Gary used to, believe it or not, drag his vibes down the stairs to this basement to sit in with us. So he'd heard Larry. I think he really, like everybody, he loved Larry. And Larry, well, we all had ambivalences about being rock stars. We were all, we all were already chafing with the record company, and we could see the cutthroat nature of the music business and what it is, and we hated it even then. So we were already like rebelling against the people who were trying to make us famous. We were fighting them every tooth and nail. And Larry also was very ambivalent because he thought if he became a rock star, he wouldn't have the jazz respect. I can't speak for him, but I think that was his attitude. And so Gary Burton offered him the gig, and he left to join Gary's band because it was more of a jazz gig. And he thought that he didn't really want to be a rocker. He didn't really want to go that way. He could have been a great rock star if he wanted to. And I give him, that was his choice to make. And after that, I didn't feel quite the same about the Free Spirits, although the Free Spirits continued for many years. They changed the name, and Everything is Everything. Chris Hills, the bass player, was the genius of the group. He was a bass player who also played drums better than anybody. I heard as a jazz drummer, he sounded a lot like Elvin. As a funk drummer, he was playing that Dave Garibaldi stuff long before I ever heard Dave Garibaldi or Tower of Power. And that's Chris Hill, the bass player. He's still alive. He's in Portland, Oregon. But they continued. Pepper stayed in. They called themselves Everything is Everything, made a record or two. But once Larry left, I didn't have the same feeling about it. And so when I had a chance to audition for Gary, I tried out. I had to sit in on Roy Haynes' drums on Roy's gig. I said, "Oh man, this is." I didn't want to sit at his drums, But Roy was like, "Hey, man, I need a break. Play the drums." He was leaving the band, so so I got the gig, and I did. Also, the truth is, Free Spirits weren't making any money. Gary Burton had jobs, he had gigs, and the music was great. I learned a lot. I saw him. I hadn't seen him in like 30 or 40 years or something. Just last week, there was a concert for Michael Gibbs, the composer, turned 80. He's good. I've known him since the 60s. He's a dear friend, and I haven't seen him in 30 or 40 years. So I said, I have to go to that. And Gary was there, so I got to say hello for a minute and thank him, basically, for giving me a chance back in the day and teaching me a lot, learned a lot from him.
Well, it seemed like there were a lot of things that came from being in Gary's group as well. I mean, aside from, of course, Larry brought you or helped bring you into the gig. After that, it seemed like there were a lot of things that kind of stemmed from that. Like I know that you were on a few of his recordings, like some of the ECM recordings, which also kind of led into doing some work. Like when Matheny got into the group as well, and you were on Matheny's Bright Size Life album, which for, I would say, probably half of our listening audience, that's probably where they're the most familiar with you with, is that first record. So kind of how did that come about? Do you have fond memories of that?
Well, I was with Gary Burton three different times.
Yeah.
And one of them was like around the 60, 67, 68, 69 maybe. Then again around 74, there was a different band, and of course we had Matheny Also, Mick Goodrick was two guitar.
Mm-hmm.
Matheny mostly played 12-string, I think, with Gary's band at that point. And Steve Swallow was in that band. Yeah, I thought Matheny was a super gifted kid at the time, and I was happy that he liked playing with me, and he brought Jocko. He knew Jocko, the bass player from Florida. I think maybe he'd gone to University of Miami briefly or something. And met Jocko, so he brought Jocko up to play, and Jocko blew me away. I mean, this guy was, wow, quite a thrill to play with him. And so, of course, I enjoyed the live gigs maybe more than the recording experience for a lot of reasons.
Yeah.
I wasn't a big fan of the ECM style particularly, although they've certainly made some great records, and the kind of the vibe and how it affected the music. But so I don't know if the recording itself was such a positive experience, but playing with Matheny and Jocko, we did a bunch of gigs one summer. They were small gigs. We played at a place called Pooh's Pub. Played another place in Somerville, really small joints, trio, and that was fun. But I was coming from a very different place, and than Matheny, even though I was only slightly older, but my experience was more with black musicians, people like Max Roach, Eric Dolphy, Coltrane, Pharaoh. That was what I was into. But I wasn't getting gigs with people like that because those people had almost all black drummers, and why not? So I would get gigs with some of the best white guys like Gary Burton and Pat Metheny. And Jocko, who really was as soulful as anybody, skin color aside. It's not about skin, it's about your soul, really. But Jocko had some force. But even him and Matheny were very different personalities. A lot of times I was kind of the referee.
Yeah.
Between the two of them. I could see both points of view. Pat is a little bit of a control freak, and he's a natural leader. He's a great composer. He knows what he wants his band to be, and he knows what he's trying to put out. And Jocko was like a wild horse, Jocko played his music, though, great. And in the early days, Matheny's tunes were like 4 pages long. There's thousands of chords. Jocko's thing was just give me an E. I'm just going to funk out an E, and that's all he needed. And so the music wasn't really letting Jocko kind of do his thing. And he was coming all the way up from Florida, taking a bus, Greyhound bus, sleeping on the couch for a $50 gig, $100 gig. And if it was me, I would have made it more like an equal trio and let everybody have their thing. But Pat, like I say, he's a natural leader. That's how he's a composer. And so eventually Jocko would start to Bogart a little bit. He would start throwing in some funk. And then also, when he would do that, the audience would go crazy. They'd start yelling, Jocko, Jocko. And I don't think Matheny liked that too much because it was his band. And so there was a little bit of conflict. So, but still great to play with them. And, somebody recorded us live at one of those gigs. If I'd have known about it at the time, I probably would have tried to stop it because I really was against that. I thought that's like stealing. It's like rape. Yeah. Now, everybody's doing it with phones. Don't even, why fight it? You can't fight it. Everything is free. All music is just taken by everybody. But in those days, and I would have fought it, but I didn't. In retrospect, I'm glad I didn't. That some of them do survive. And somebody tagged me in Facebook or something. I'm not a computer person, but I get tagged once in a while. So, and it was a conversation among bass players about electric bass versus acoustic bass, whether it's possible to really play jazz, like straight ahead, standard swing, with the electric bass. And a lot of very intelligent people weighed in on that. Eddie Gomez said the only difference is on the acoustic bass you can bow. Somebody else said, well, it depends on who you listen to growing up. Most of the acoustic bass players listen to Paul Chambers and people like that, and the electric guys were listening to Motown, so they may not have the concept. But anyway, as an example, the guy who put up some of this trio stuff with me and Matheny and Jocko playing standards, and I'd forgot that we played standard. I remembered only playing Matheny's tunes, and so you hear us playing "There'll Never Be Another You" and all these kind of tunes. I have to say, it was swinging. We were all overplaying, but that's often the case with youth, you know. But still taking chances. It was not in the box, but pushing the envelope and swinging hard, definitely swinging hard. And Jocko swing as hard as anybody. But he grew up with that kind of music, Frank Sinatra, Count Basie. It was in his DNA because his pops was that kind of a singer, was like Frank Sinatra, Tony Bennett style singer. So, and he used to do shows with Frank, with Sammy Davis Jr. He was in the house band at the big hotels in Florida. So Jocko certainly could swing on the electric bass, and Steve Swallow certainly can. But you know, it depends again on the concept. But it was good to hear those tunes, and they were fairly well recorded. Surprised somebody hasn't put a CD out of them.
It's probably just a matter of time, Bob. Now that you said that, so yeah.
Well, they're waiting for Matheny to die, so they don't have a legal problem because he might sue him or something.
Yeah,
but he should. People should just take music for free and put it out. But I wouldn't mind. It sounded good. I mean, it really sounded good. It was, and I was surprised to hear those standards playing the swing like we were. I didn't remember that.
Bob, just around that time, or possibly just prior, I think probably just prior to that, you were in a group with Jack DeJohnette called Compost. And I would like to get your thoughts on that group, how it came together as well, and just what was the concept behind it. Because, again, Compost is another one of those groups, in my opinion, a little bit like the Free Spirits, that it was kind of new. There was just some new stuff that happened with that group. It was very experimental. Just there were a lot of different things that you guys were going for with that group.
Yeah, I think so. I think both of those groups were ahead of their time, for sure. Compost was probably the most fun I ever had in being in a group because the people were so great. But we like to get together with the drummers. I think Compost was actually inspired by Nina Simone had a band, and in her band she had Don Elias, who was a great hand drummer, conga player, but also a great drum set player. He was my favorite percussionist of all time, hand drummer that I've ever done. And also Juma Santos, who became a member of Compost, who was playing conga. And Juma played later on Bitches Brew and all, he was a great conga player. And so I remember me and Jack hearing that and saying, man, I like how that rhythm set, because it was funky, but it was still improvising, still very loose. And there's a few clips of that band with Nina, with those guys. And so we got together with Don, with Juma. We got together with drummers. It was really mostly drummers. 4 or 5 drummers would get together. And eventually other people came in. It was a drummers band. And we would play for hours. Jack had that kind of energy. I played for 11 hours straight. So little by little, people who were kind of part of the family. Jack Gregg, bass player from Memphis, came in. Harold Vick, that was Jack's choice. And I wasn't really aware of Harold Vick, but I would say to this day he's in my top 4 saxophone players of all time. Being moved by a horn player. Harold Vick was great. He was soulful and free. And we had Juma and 2 Jacks, Jack DeJohnette and Jack Gregg. And though we didn't officially have a guitar player, when we recorded, we added guitar players sometimes. We had George Davis, who's a kind of New Orleans legend. He wrote the song, Tell It Like It Is. That was his song. We had Roland Prince, great guitar player. I think he's from Antigua. He played with Elvin there. And he had also that island thing. He did some calypso stuff with him, Afro thing. So, and Jack was a great keyboard player and also a great singer. And he was able to play keyboard and sing really well, which to me always seemed very difficult to sing and play any instrument. Like Levon Helm, who seemed like top 5 drummers of all time. He's my hero. It's amazing to me that he could play so well and sing so well at the same time. Jack used to do it on the piano. And so eventually, I think also we thought Compost to me, although we didn't necessarily capture this on the record, we did 2 records, and I dig them both, but we were as a jam band. I mean, we were like Coltrane with a funk beat. In other words, we would stretch. We'd take 40 minutes on a tune. And also, when we do the live gigs, we would always end the gig with a double drum solo with me and Jack. And that sometimes, after playing an hour and a half hard, like really hard, we would play another 40 minutes sometimes, really hard. And at the end of that too, I always just remember to say to Jack, I said, Jack, you're crazy, man. I wanted to quit like 20 minutes ago, but I was dying, but you never stopped. And he goes, me? It was you that kept me going. And to this day, I'm pretty sure it was him. but they were amazing because he has some of those on tape. At one time, I haven't seen him much recently, but one time when I visited him many years later, he played some of that stuff for me. He got to the double drum. So, I mean, at times it sounded like 20 guys. It sounded like a whole tribe. In the beginning, when it first started, it was so full, it sounded like 5 drummers. And I said to him, I said, Jack, that's just you and me? He goes, no, that's just me. You haven't come in yet. So, and I remembered that's how we start. He would start, then I would do, and then eventually we'd meld. So he would make a statement, I would make a statement, and then I think that definitely elevated my playing a lot because if you have to follow Jack DeJohnette, you better come up with something. You're gonna look kind of silly. So I think I was kind of almost forced to elevate my drumming in a good way, challenged to become a stronger player. And we had a lot of fun. We would do at the end of the gigs. We had what we call a people sandwich. Jack used to play with no shirt on. I have pictures of him with no shirt. Young Jackie looked good, wearing shark's teeth. He had a shark's tooth necklace and no shirt. And so usually at the end of the gig, we'd have what we call a people sandwich, kind of a group hug. We just go out in the audience. Anybody in the audience who wanted to hug the band would just get in there, and sometimes a lot of some deep soul kissing going on in the sandwich that nobody would even know about because you couldn't tell. It was like a scrum, like a rugby scrum, but loving. I love him. So yeah, we had a lot of fun, but we never really made it. We were a lot of business stuff. We were signed by Columbia. Later, I found out what the truth of that was. We had a manager who managed the group Yes, the English, that had Bill Bruford. Mm-hmm. And we actually did some gigs opposite Yes. And Bruford, I remember, couldn't believe that we were opening for him. But he said, "Man, you guys, you're drumming." It's like, oh, thanks, Bill. But they were more for the teeny poppers. People loved them. But anyway, the manager, he basically, I think Yes's contract was coming was going to run out with Atlantic. They was with Atlantic, and Columbia Records wanted them. So basically, he said, "Look, I'll give you Yes when they're free, but you have to hire this group, Complex." They didn't want us. I found that out later. They had no interest. They wanted to get Yes, and then I think he wound up screwing them because they didn't get Yes anyway. But he managed to get a $50,000 advance from Columbia. He took 25. He took half. Yeah. Took 5, and I think there was 20 to share between the 5 of us. So we each got $4,000 each, which at that time, even now, is the most money I've ever seen in one time. And I wound up using that to buy a house. My wife at the time, she kind of instigated it. There was a down payment for a house in upstate New York, and Jack was living in the country too, and so we had composts. We were city people don't know about composts, but country people know about compost. So we had compost, and it's for people who don't know it, it's any organic garbage. When you finish with your fruits and your vegetables, you put it in a pile. Eventually it rots and it starts to stink. And you put it in the ground and mix it with a little mulch or hay, and things grow like crazy. So. But it's kind of, if you get up close, it's kind of, your nose would go like, ooh, and we thought, wow, our music is just like that. When you hear it, your nose goes, ooh. So we thought it was a good name for the group. So fun times. Harold Vick, to this day, my top 4 favorite saxophone players.
So, Bob, you mentioned that the success of Compost essentially ended up netting you your first house in New York, or in upstate New York. I
wouldn't call it success, but yeah, right. Yeah.
So
we got a contract. Yeah.
Now, you've been in Boston, though, for quite a while. How long have you been up there?
Since '85, I think. Yeah, I came up right after my son Raphael was born in '85 in New Jersey, And shortly after that, we came up to Boston because I'd gotten a gig at New England Conservatory like a year or two before that.
Yeah.
And I was commuting. But fortunately, there was an airport in Newark. It wasn't too far from where I lived. And but it was crazy. I was commuting up there. And, I wasn't getting any gigs in New York. I mean, I was dying. And I lived in Jersey, but still, it's kind of like a suburb of New York. And so I thought, why not? The thinking was maybe I'd be more like a big fish in a smaller pond in Boston. I'd get more gigs. Didn't turn out that way. I never gigged in Boston, but I love being here now. So that's great. And the place where I live in Quincy, I could never afford a place like this in New York. I have 2 floors. I have the drums on the top floor. I mean, we don't own it, we're renting it, but the rent is cheap relative to New York. My son now lives in New York. When I told him what I make a year, he said, "That's impossible, Dad. You can't. That's not feasible." I said, well, somehow I'm doing it, and I'm putting out records too, without help of a record company or GoFundMe or anything. So, I like it. It's quiet. Where I live, it's a dead-end street. It's like nothing happening. There's no culture. There's no, and I don't need it. I had plenty of that when I was younger. I have enough going on internally, stimulation too. I don't crave external stimulation. When I was young, I did. I wanted to be in New York, but New York was different then too.
Yeah. Well, Bob, that's the perfect segue about moving to Boston that would kind of lead us into your educational career as a teacher. And so you're still at New England Conservatory. So you've been there for over 30 years now. And yeah. And one of the things I want to talk about that you and I discussed last week is a book that you put out back in the 80s, and I suppose it was probably fairly close to the time that you moved to Boston. It's called Drum Wisdom. And to me, and to a lot of other people, it's one of the top music methods, if you want to call it that, that's ever been written. And I wanted to ask you to tell our listeners, how did you come up with this? Or in other words, what was the impetus to write this book? Was it something you always wanted to do, or did a publisher such as Modern Drummer Publishings, who published it, were they the ones that approached you to write it?
Well, neither, actually. I had no desire to write a book. I hate writing. I'm actually not bad at it. My dad was a writer, but I don't like doing it. It's not fun. I'd much rather go swimming or play basketball, take a nap, or meditate, or sit in the sun and write anything. But, who kept bugging me to do it was Danny Gottlieb, who was he seemed to be a big Bob Moses fan. And he kept saying, man, the stuff you tell me, this is so good. We got to get this. And he came to my house. He transcribed all this stuff. I talked it. He transcribed, wrote it out. He transcribed examples of, resolution points and stuff like that. So he really was. I give him credit for pushing me to do it. And I guess he knew some of the people at Modern Drummer. So the concepts in the book. I mean, there's not just one, but one of the main concepts is improvising to resolution points. And that came to me. The first gigs I ever did was playing vibes in the Latin band, playing salsa. I was about 14 or 15. We used to play little places, church basements in Bronx, and people dance all night long. We play 8 sets a night, 50 minutes on, 10 minutes off. The last set would end at 10 to 5 in the morning. And even then, some people said, "Hey man, where you going? Come on, man, the party just they want to dance. Where you going?" But I got to solo a lot on the vibes list I realized 2 reasons. Latin people like the vibes, like Tito Puente and Carl Jader. They like the sound, but also the trumpet players needed a break from all them double high C's and everything. So, Baya, Bobby, go, go, go. So I would solo on every tune, and that was a lot of fun. My first time playing for dancers, But what I noticed right away from the drummers, there were really some good drummers in that. There was a conga player who was the leader. There was a timbali guy. There was a bongo guy. There was even the horn players played percussion. They played shekere, cowbell, clave itself, And And I noticed that they were improvising a lot, much like jazz drummers do. But the groove was always there. The dancers never felt like they had to stop dancing. See? And I asked them, how do you do that? To me, that was very mysterious. And they told me, they said, oh, it's the clave, man. Don't you know about the clave? I said, no, I'm a 15-year-old white guy. What does that mean? And they explained to me that there's underlying resolution points, basically, that they have that stuff so internalized. But if it's a 2-3, son clave is and they'd had that, so they didn't have to play only that. They could play around that. They even could figure out what's the most important hit in that, which I later learned was the hand of 2. If it's a 2-3, it's in the second bar.
Yeah.
It's in the first bar. And so that was like the light bulb went on over my head. I was like, oh, this is a very important, not a secret, because world musicians all over the world knew about this, but it was secret to me. I didn't know about it. And so this is a very important question, to be able to play for dancers and still improvise. It seems to me that's a basic skill that if you're trying to be a drummer, one should have. Interestingly enough, I asked that question to them. Not one student ever asked me about that. But to me, that was big. So that's out of that, I kind of developed what I call my resolution point meditations. Really.
Uh-huh.
I knew that I wasn't going to play just Latin music for my whole life, but I thought this is very important that I can improvise to any point in the bar. And if we look at the flow of time as eighth notes, which we can, I mean, it could be 16ths, could be a triplet flow sometimes, but let's say, keeping it simple, eighth note flow.
Uh-huh.
You got 8 points. If you have a 2-bar phrase, basically your smallest phrase of music, right? 1 bar is too small. You can't really develop a phrase in 1 bar. It's possible, but not really. Not much. Not too much. 2 bars is basically your smallest phrase. Of course, you can have longer, a 4-bar or a whole 32-bar song. To me, that has a 32-bar clave. Sometimes it has points.
Mm-hmm.
You see a lot more points. But just to see if you can improvise on 1 point per 2 bars seemed to me very basic, something you'd have to know how to do. Basically master each point in the bar. And while you're working on 1 point at a time, whatever that point you choose, you're actually learning about the interrelation between all points, because you're not just hitting and a 4 in the second bar. How do you get there? You might want to keep bang to keep bang to keep bang to bang to bang to bang to bang to bang to bang to. There's many ways to get to and a 4 are very prevalent, certainly in jazz, big time. But they're all good, man. All the points, they're all necessary. And it takes a lot of the mystery out of it. Really, 8 points you have to master. You could say 16 because sometimes you put them in the first bar, sometimes you put them in the second bar. So then later, when you go to playing this more what I so-called stream of consciousness, where there is no one resolution point, where you're just continually changing, you can connect your ideas. So it's one continuous flow rather than an idea that dies, and then another idea that dies, and another idea that dies. That's how a lot of people play. There's no connection.
Yeah.
So I can, if I can do that well at all, it's because of all the time I've spent on each point individually. Then I don't need points. And still be funky, still be danceable.
Bob, I think it's important for me to tell you that one of our last guests that we had on the show was the drummer Tom Brechtlein, and on the show in particular, he made it a point to talk about there was a time that he saw you in Copenhagen. It was sometime in the late 70s. And after your set, he came up to you, spoke to you about some stuff that you had played. And basically, you gave him a short lesson on essentially what you just described, resolution points, and also the importance of especially keeping the melody of a song in your head and being able to play those resolution points through your different phrasings and things. And so in particular, he wanted me to tell you thank you for that lesson, that's something that he still uses to this day.
Well, beautiful. That's great. Well, if you talk to him, give him my thanks and my love back. Yeah.
I absolutely will.
Anything I show people is only to help. Sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't. Many people, of course, it's also better to impart the information voice to voice by singing, by dancing, by drumming it, than reading it. Sure. And I'm aware that a lot of people who read the book didn't understand it at all. Even though they praise it, they give me, oh, it's a great book, but they didn't understand what I was talking about at all. Whereas if you come face to face, that's much better way of imparting it. So, I'm glad it was useful. I'm glad whenever anything I show people is useful.
Bob, another concept inside the book is a term that I'm not sure if you actually created this term, but if you did or if you didn't, it has become, in my opinion, synonymous with this style of playing, and that is organic drumming. And I wanted to just ask you if you could kind of give and I know we just talked about having, a description in a book that could sometimes be maybe interpreted or misinterpreted a couple of different ways, but how would you tell our listeners the concept of organic drumming?
Well, organic drumming just means that which can't be transcribed. It's like nature. It's like a cloud. It's like the ocean. It's like a rock slide. It's like an avalanche. It's like a babbling brook. And it's, you can't write those rhythms. If you could, who could read it?
Right.
But the point is that, people like Elvin and Jack DeJohnette are very organic drummers. And if you're still dealing with time and form, you can bring the organic, or another way to say it is the cosmic, really, into your form. You have to have the form has to be really strong internally, and then you can do that. So, for example, if we're talking about resolution point, the 8/8, I just said and the 4, so let's stay on and the 4. Mm-hmm. If you have 2 bars of 8th note with a pulse very clear in your mind, let's say after a while you can say that's bringing the organic into form. Then, of course, the way I play now, I'm not even dealing with form. It's pretty much all organic, because I'm not even worried about 8 notes or resolutions too much. I like to play from rubato. That's been my evolution. But you can play organic. You can bring the organic into your forms, and if your form is strong, and you won't get lost. See? But I always warn people, don't worry, I won't do that on your gig. Don't be afraid.
Yeah.
And I do it. I play a gig. I like playing nothing. For 10 years, I didn't play anything faster than an 8th note, because I knew I had to master my 8th note flow.
Yeah.
That's very important for the drummers to have your grid, your ride, nice, even, wide, fat, big, but also even. See? So eventually I felt strong enough with the grid that I could let the organic back in. And that happened after going to Hawaii and seeing the volcanoes. Talk about it organic. When you see molten lava coming down a hill, that's pretty organic. So I let that into my form. I could do that on a song. I could do that on a groove. Sometimes just a little bit. And just maybe for half a second or something. You could add a little bit. And definitely. Yeah. It's nice, man. I hear that in Elvin, I hear that in Jack, I hear that in some of my favorite drummers.
So, Bob, one last thing I want to talk about in Drum Wisdom is there's a concept that you put in there also that you've titled the non-independent method. And one of the things that I think is so striking about that is that we spend so much time as drummers working on independence from the standpoint of trying to get our limbs to work independently simultaneously, that sometimes the whole concept of playing hands together or limbs together is lost a lot of times. And you address that in this concept. So tell us a little bit about that concept of the non-independent method.
Well, that's another one, again, that would be much easier if I was at the drums. You'd see it in a minute. And it's nothing that I invented. It's more something that I observed, that how people play. See, let's say that, a ride beat doesn't have to be ding, ding, da, ding, ding, da, ding, ding, da, ding, but you have to keep something going on the cymbal. Let's say the hi-hat, if you're doing a funk, your ride is more on the hi-hat. If you're doing jazz, it's more maybe more on the cymbal. So what I figured is that I could do a lot more with all my limbs. It actually gives the impression of being more independent if I didn't try to do all these. Well, it's like a triplet flow. If I'm obligated to go ding ding da ding and my left foot going chick to ding, and then I want to say that's very hard. Not much I could do, and if I did it, it would be stuff that I worked on and memorized, which is not spontaneous, and very often doesn't even fit with the music. It's also human nature. The people who practice that stuff, they got to show it. Look, I worked so hard on it. I got to show it, and it may not even fit. So if I just took the two hands and separated them, did a triplet flow, and again, it's hard for you to see what I'm doing or hear it, but if the right is and I just put the right hand on the cymbal, put the right foot with the right hand sometimes, which is very natural because right wants to work with right. It sounds much fuller, and I can do these figures spontaneously based on the music that I'm hearing that I want to play. That's not something I have to pre-practice, pre-memorize. Non-independently. And I observed drummers play, and I noticed that most of what they played was not independent, was non-independent. So this is my way of, it's also very useful for fast tempos.
Right.
Where you can, if you can get a flow going at, say, this speed, and then you put the right hand on the cymbal, and then put the right foot with it, sounds much easier than trying to go ding, 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 which, unless you're Tony Williams, you're going to run out of juice.
Bob, let's go ahead and talk about your actual tenure that you've had at New England Conservatory. How many students do you normally teach? Do you teach applied lessons or do you teach ensembles? What all do you do at New England Conservatory?
Well, not much. I have one ensemble. I used to have two. I got demoted, and this year I have, I think, 6 or 7, but last semester I had 4. So the truth is, very few people want to study with me at that school. And that's okay. It's all right. I don't have any problem with that. I don't tell anybody they should. Those who see the value in it, come. And usually I get freshmen, which is interesting. Not by sophomore, they seniors almost never hit the freshmen. And in a certain way, I like that because I put it this way, the concrete hasn't hardened around them yet. So they may still be pliable, flexible, open. I'm about to turn 70 and I'm still pliable, flexible, open, learning, changing, growing. But a lot of times the people seem to, they just want to play what they know, even at that young age.
Right.
They really don't want to try new things too much. And also, they don't like the challenge. I think, if I don't really ask them why you don't study with me, but my take on it is the stuff that I give them is too simple. And they can't do it. And they don't like being exposed because they're already doing gigs and making tours and imitating Jack DeJohnette and Tony Williams. And I say, can you just improvise to one in a 2-bar phrase? Boom, together, really want to I'm telling you, they can't do it. They cannot do it.
Yeah.
Cannot do it. Let alone and a 2 or 4 and even 1 in the first bar. And by the way, one is sometimes the thing, man. And they're not working on it. they're not working on this stuff. And so it's too. I think that's what it is. It's too simple, and they don't dig it. They want complex stuff, and they want information. And also, I deal with feel. And it's not. You don't need information. There's no information in the first bar of a 2-bar phrase. By the way, nothing faster than eighth notes in the beginning. You know, fancy. Let's see what you can do with eighth notes. I could do all day on one with nothing faster than eighth notes, and it's not boring. And it's also, hopefully, if I'm doing it well, it's danceable and also playable over, because a lot of what drummers do is accompany. So you have to work to be good accompanist means to practice playing on stuff that people could play over. That means practice accompaniment. And
Yeah.
So I think this is too simple. That's the feeling I get. That's why I don't have that many students. But this semester I have a few more. So we'll see. Every year it's a little different. It depends on who signs up.
From the time you started up there in the early 80s to now, have you seen any differences in students? And what I mean is primarily just like the willingness to learn, or just the openness or the closeness. Are there difference between your students now as opposed to 30 years ago?
Yeah, definitely. There was a much higher level. There were much higher level back in the day, but there's still a few come through who are very strong. But it's much higher level.
Bob, let's now change direction a little bit. I want to ask you about another one of your very, very long-running musical relationships, and one of the more important music relationships and just personal relationships in your life. Tell us a little bit about Tuskegee Munoz.
Yeah, well, I don't think it's overstating the case to say that he's kind of saved my life. That's a very dark period when I finally went to him for spiritual help. Tuskegee Munoz is a spiritual master, I have no doubt. I've known him for 40 years, so I've watched him close, and I have absolutely no doubt about that. And that's something that most people won't even understand what that is, because they've never met one or been around one. He also happens to be by far the greatest musician I ever heard, but that's almost secondary, although it's what first drew me to him. So when I was introduced to him by a piano player friend of mine named John Weiss, a cat I used to play with when I was a kid, a very good piano player. And he knew that I loved Coltrane's music because I felt a spiritual thing from Coltrane music. And he said, well, if you love Coltrane music, he said, you got to check this guitar player, Tuskegee. He said, but also, just so you know, he's a guru of sorts. I said, oh, okay, interesting. So I remember I met him. I went and played, and I knew from the first note, and I knew he was a master from the first note. At least my heart knew. There was no question. And watching him and how he interacted with his son and with people, and I said, I never met anybody like this. And the playing was beyond anything I ever heard. And I heard a lot, but it took me about almost 20 years before I came to him for spiritual help, for spiritual guidance. In the beginning, it was just about the music. I just wanted to play. And I told him something that I don't remember ever telling anybody else. I don't think so. After first playing with him, I said, look, anytime you want me to play with you, I'm there. Doesn't matter if it pays or doesn't pay, or if I have to pay, if it's in Alaska, I don't care. I'll be there. You want me to be there? I'll be there, because it was such food for thought, for the soul. Food, not food for thought, food for the soul, food for spirit. And I've never felt that from anybody playing with anybody else. And so I have maintained that pretty much. I think I had to miss one time because I had already promised these people I was going to Europe. But I turned down a 2-week European tour. I really needed the money to do one gig for $100 in New York at a place that I didn't even like, the awful place, and play one set with him. That's how much it meant to me. But then, later when I went to him for spiritual help, I was in a very bad time. I was really suffering on pretty much every level, personal level, music level, wasn't happy, personal life, relationship, romance, whatever relationship. Suffering, financial suffering, bad. At one point, I thought I had the worst luck. I was like Job in the Bible times 10. And I asked if I could come to him without not about the music. No drums, no drums. Just sit. And he said, yeah. By the way, his patience was amazing because he knew things that would help me a long time ago, but he never said, look, you need to listen to me. I can help you do this, do that. Never. He waited until I came to him, which that's another way to know a real master. They don't try to change you. They wait until you ask, and then you have to ask correctly too. And if it's a real need, he will help you. And the first time I sat, I think we sat for almost 18 hours. I was slumping and slouching and exhausted. He was sitting upright for the whole time, completely alert, speaking perfect Dharma, every word perfect Dharma. And at one point he said, you look a little tired, maybe you need to lie down. He didn't, but I did. And so I lay down for a few hours.
Yeah.
A few hours later, he was like, so I said, oh, man. Yeah. That's when I started realizing how hard spiritual practice is. To this day, I find it very, very, very difficult. But there's no doubt that his guidance, influence has helped me in numerous ways, and musically too. But it's more like just in life.
You've also performed on a lot of Tusiji's music, and you've produced a lot of it as well, which kind of brings us to what you've been up to over the past several years. You've got your own record label, and you've put out many discs, some of your own as well, including some things that were recorded back in the 60s and 70s and 80s that you've sort of re-released. So
released for the first time, not re-released.
Or released for the first time, yeah.
Well, I did steal back a couple of ones that were on other record companies that you couldn't find and were unavailable. And so, yeah, I made copies of some of my old records on Gramavision or something like that. But no, almost all the old ones are stuff that never came out that I thought was worthy. And just for clarification, all of Tusiji's music, except for one or two that were produced by Paul Schaefer that was on a different label, are on his label called Anami Music. So anybody who's interested in Tusiji's music should look up Anami Music. That's ANAMI. And I didn't produce any of them. I contributed sometimes, like I chipped in the expense. Some of them that we can't afford to make physical copies. We have this disc maker in the house, so we can actually make. It costs us, we have to buy these special CDs and the ink and everything, but we can do it. And so, a couple of them, I really wanted physical copies of his records, so I offered to make them, including one with Billy Hart with two drummers. The drumming is sweet, called Heart Trance Revelation, which was only available on internet, and now I have physical copies of that. And, but other than that, no, he produces all his records. I've been blessed to be on a couple. There's one record called Alpha Nebulae that I would say is the most profound, deep music I've ever heard, period, of anybody, any record. And that one, I'm happy to be on. Well, one of the things that I like about it, I don't recognize myself at all. That's part of it too, is to see spiritual practice is getting beyond yourself. And what I learned from being with him too is that all suffering is self-created. So all that stuff I was going through, I was doing it to myself. And it's clear to me now. You can't blame it on the world or bad luck or Donald Trump or anything like that. If you're suffering, you're doing it to yourself. And that's good news and bad news. The good news, the bad news is, oh shit, I'm the asshole. It's like causing all the problem. The good news is I'm the one who can fix it. It's within my power to fix it and to be back, to get beyond my pain, mechanical attachments, basically, patterns, habits, things like that, knee-jerk reaction to things that make you angry. In terms of my own stuff, I have Kalam records, and most of the stuff is new music, but there's a few things that I found in the vaults that had never come out. There's one called, I call it Visionary Vintage Visionary Vignettes, and it was duos and trios with a bunch of different people recorded, I think, sometime in the 70s in New York. I don't even remember exactly what year, but it was beautiful stuff. I have Gene Lee and Sheila Jordan, two of the greatest singers I don't think ever recorded together. They recorded on that. But most of it is new, and I we just finished number 15 now on Rock Alarm Records, which is we just uploaded it. It should be within a week or two. It should be available by download on the internet. I think all the usual iTunes, eMusic, whatever you would ordinarily buy. I don't download shit. I'm old school. I like physical copies. But we also make the physical copies, which usually you won't find those unless you come to one of my gigs or come to my house for a lesson. I'm going to Italy in a couple of weeks. I'm going to bring a box of stuff. I usually sell a few when I'm traveling like that, but I like having the physical copy. I give away probably more than I sell. But yeah, and I get to design the cover because I'm a visual artist before I was a musician. So they look beautiful. The newest one is called Spaceships Over Africa, with a saxophonist from Nigeria named Oki Leo, who lives in London. And he came to visit at one point, and we did this record. But I got a ton coming up. And for the drummers, I got so many that are in process. There's one that's very special to me. And I may even try these GoFundMe things that I've never done. I'm not a person for this one because I'd like to promote it a little bit and also get a nice cover and a booklet. I mean, all the covers are nice, but they're very basic. This one I think would be nice to have a good booklet. And that's a record I did with Edgar Bateman. And Edgar Bateman was the greatest drummer I ever heard, period. When I first heard him when I was a teenager, I thought that. And hearing him again in 2006 when we recorded it, he was 77, I still thought. He had changed how he played, but I still thought he was the greatest drummer I ever heard. And as you know, I heard all these guys, Elvin and Max Roach and Blakey and Roy Haynes and Rashid Ali and Billy Eagle. But when I heard Edgar, I said, yeah, this is the greatest. So we recorded 2 days in the summer of 2006. For a lot of reasons, it took a long time. Unfortunately, Edgar passed away, but it's coming. It's coming. It'll probably by sometime in 2018. It's going to be a double CD. It's going to be called Creative Infinity and Love Eternal. Edgar Bateman and Robert Lombardo. We did a day of duets and with solos. I wound up taking out all my solos because, first of all, they suffered in comparison so much compared to his. But also because I'm around to make more solos, and he's not with us anymore, so I felt like these were really precious. There's so little of him on record. And the few records that he's on where you can get even a taste of how great he was are very obscure and hard to find. There's 3 YouTube clips of him that are brief, and they're amazing. Each one is amazing. But so this, to me, this is a treasure to have this record, this recording of him. And then we did another day with a bunch of horn players, playing some of my crazy melodies, but featuring the 2 drummers. And that's a very strong drum record. And so that's coming. A bunch. I've been doing a lot. It's been a very creative period to me, most creative period. And somebody observed, and I think it's true. Well, you got a bunch of them, so you can tell me if you think so. But somebody said these records don't sound like anybody else's music, and they don't sound like each other either. Each one is completely different from each other.
I think that's very accurate, and I think that's also a wonderful compliment as well. Yes.
No reason to do the same thing twice. I don't need, once it's done, it's done. And that's how I feel about creative stuff. I think a lot of people, they create something, and then they just keep playing it their whole life. And they're entitled to it because they invented it, and so they can certainly reap the rewards of it. But I'm one, that's why I'm not, probably popular or famous or whatever, but I prefer to play what I don't know. That's what I find healing. I learn stuff so I don't need to play it again. That's why I learn stuff. And I think it's important to learn stuff. And the things that I teach are very basic. I work with students. I say, get your resolution points, get your 2-3, your 3-2 clave, get your samba, get your funk, get your swing. Get your 6/8, very important. But these are basic rhythms that have been played over and over and over, and they're still great. They're sacred. But I can do that. I may fall into that once in a while if spirit tells me that's what's needed, but with no attachment. And for the most part, what I'm playing is all brand new rhythms and brand new music, and each one different from each other too. So, yeah, I feel good about that. That's what heals me. Most humans like to hear what they're familiar with.
So, Bob, these days, what does a typical day look like for Bob Moses? What do you like to do every day?
As little as possible if I can get away with it. I definitely do some sitting. I do some hewing, that's breathing. I do some push-ups if I can. I always have kind of errands and things that I need to do, whether it's going to the post office or fixing things, or always breaking. And also and the other thing is we're working. I have a friend who's my roommate, who's my engineer, named Gyan Das, who lives here. He's one of my two roommates, because I have to have roommates because I'm too poor to afford a place by myself. But they're both very cool. The other roommate is sweet lady. She's funny. She's good with the computer. She's the one who helped me set up Skype. And the other guy is Gyan Das, who's an engineer. And so he lives almost rent-free, pretty cheap, in a room the size of a closet. But he doesn't have to do a soul-killing day job. So a lot of times when we can, in fact, later today, we're going to continue working on mixing. I'm mixing and editing. I do more of that than actually playing. But I do have that magical drum set. I think I sent you a picture. Didn't I send you some photos of the drum set?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, and you sure did, and they will be included on the podcast
whenever
we.
Good.
Yeah,
I'm
so
just
absolutely.
Seeing it, and whenever I can, I go up there and tap. And I have people. Sometimes people come over to play. And we record. We recorded a lot of stuff up there. I think I sent you one of the I don't remember everything I sent you, because I didn't send you everything by a long shot. I think I sent you one with Tupac, the percussionist from Colombia, kind of brilliant.
You did.
Percussionist, and that was the first one that Gyan Das recorded in that room with my drum set. And that was in 2006, also, I think. And in those days, he didn't have enough mics. We didn't have enough mic stands. We actually were duct taping mics to the back of a chair. And yet it still sounds really good. It was a magical date and a good sound. So a lot of what we're doing is editing, mixing, designing album covers. I do teach one day a week at NEC. That's a Wednesday, and usually it's a very strenuous day. I get up at 5:30 and I get home at 8 or 9. I give a lot of energy because sometimes I got to wake the kids up, and so that if they come late, I don't have to work so hard. But a lot of them very sleepy energy, so I'm always trying to lift their spirits, and that takes a lot of energy. I'm not complaining. I'm happy to do it.
Yeah.
But then often Thursday I sleep in if I can. I usually sleep in. Thursday's a day of rest for me. But I have no plan, and that's what I like about it. My only day gig is at NEC, and it's basically done in May, and doesn't start till mid-September. I told you I ran into Gary Bird, and he told me, I'm retired now. I retired last year. And I said, hey, well, that's great. Congratulations. I said, I've been retired for 40 years.
Yeah. So, Bob, we're about to power down and finish up. Is there anything else that you would like to either promote or tell the folks out there that's going to listen to this?
Well, we the website that Gyan Das started that basically, has to, promotes Rock Alarm Records is called nativepulse.com. And,
right.
And also, there is another thing, sure. And all these CDs are available, like I say, by internet, and physical copies. If you write me, you're welcome to share my email with people who are interested. I'll send them copies if they want, physical. And the other thing is, I did a video recently. There's a guy named the company is called Adam Small, and it's Adam Small's MyMasterclass.com. And I guess he's done a bunch of people. And it was recorded in my room upstairs with the beautiful, magical, very unique drum set. And there's part 1 and part 2. They're about 45 minutes each. And it's a pretty good representation of where I'm at concept-wise. They divided it into chapters. They used some of the artwork, some of my paintings between chapters. I appreciated that. And it's well recorded because Gyan Das, my engineer, recorded them, so he got a good. He knows how to record my drum. He got a good sound, and I think I've probably spoken better and maybe played better, but it's good enough. It's representative. There was no rehearsal and no second takes. It was just 45 minutes and then another 45 minutes. And some people really love it. Pete Zeldman, that's somebody I should mention, by the way. definitely inspired me a lot. A true drum genius. People aren't hip to Pete Zeldman. You should definitely check out Pete Zeldman. I changed a lot in my plan after I heard Pete Zeldman, because he made me feel really lazy and uncreative compared to what he was doing. Anyway, he said he thought it was the best drum video he ever seen, so I don't know. But anyway, drummers who dig what I'm into, who dig this interview, they can get that, and if they buy them, I get a few ducats, which definitely help, because it helps to sustain what I'm doing, the creative work. Almost all the records lose money, but I still do them. But if I sell a few, that's great, and you might enjoy them. You can definitely see me playing on that drum set. So
yeah,
I recommend it. I'll promote that.
Tremendous. And Bob, we'll make sure we get all this stuff in the show notes too that get published with the podcast, so people will also be able to have the actual websites and have the different information in written form in front of them as well. So we'll make sure that that's included.
Great. Well, you're more computer savvy than me, so you can maybe find the links and cut and paste them in there, or however you do it. That would be great.
Definitely do that.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. Bob, listen, man, you have been absolutely tremendous, man. Thank you so much for agreeing to be on the show. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Well, thank you, Phil. You're a pleasure, man. It was a joy to talk to you, and I'm very grateful that you're interested and have such positivity, and hopefully between us as a beginning of a long-term association and friendship.
Oh, I look absolutely forward to that, Bob. Absolutely, man. And I know that our listeners are going to really appreciate this as well. Like I said, you've been an in-demand guest, and I can't wait to get this all produced up and get it out there for everybody to listen.
Beautiful. Well, thank you so much, Phil. What Tasiji says, Hugh, that's the sound of exhalation. Love always.
Big thanks to Rock Alarm Bob Moses. Such a treat to have him on the show. If there ever has been a drummer deserving wider recognition, you have just listened to him. And like I said at the beginning of the show, I highly encourage inquisitive listeners to do their drumming archaeology. Go in there, find some of those great Bob Moses sides. As he mentioned on the show, and I will mention again, you can go to nativepulse.com to find a whole bunch of the different records that he has either released or re-released and or just recorded and released. All the stuff that he puts out there is unique and creative to the max. The track you're listening to right now, underneath my inane blabbering, is a release that Bob did of one of his own solo albums called Devotion that was recorded back in 1979. The track is called Portsmouth Figurations. Features Tero Masahino on cornet, Dave Liebman saxophone, Steve Swallow bass, Steve Kuhn piano, and of course Rock Alarm Bob Moses on drums. Once again, another major mad props to the wonderful Ryan Almario for his production wizardry in making this a listenable show on the production end side of things. So once again, big thanks to Ryan. All right. Until next week, you can always find us on iTunes, Google Play Podcast, Stitcher, Podbean, anywhere that you listen to and find your favorite podcasts and music. You can probably find us. If you can't find us, let us know, and we will point you in the right direction. You can communicate with us at our email address, which is drummersweeklygroovecast@gmail.com. You can also interact with us at social media. We have a Facebook page, which is facebook.com/drummersweeklygroovecast. And if you like to tweet, you can tweet us. We are at DWGroovecast. New episodes come out every single Monday, so subscribe today. Also, if you're in iTunes, we would greatly appreciate you swinging by the Drummers Weekly Groovecast homepage inside of iTunes. There's where you see our list of episodes that we have, read a little description about us, and more importantly, you can leave us a short written review. It helps us out so much. We relate better to other podcasts of our same ilk, so folks who listen to drumming podcasts and music podcasts can be able to find us a little bit better. All right, that's it for now. We'll listen to a little bit of Rock Alarm Bob Moses, and we'll see you next Monday.